Hi, everyone. Welcome to our cancer education series. I'm Dick Deming. I'm medical director of Mercy One Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. This weekly cancer education series is brought to you with a grant from the Rosalie and Sherry Exline Ziegler Fund. So thanks for joining us. And I have two guests tonight. And two, better than one, twice as good.
Be
So I have
careful.
Tim Mauro and Larry Laughlin, and Tim is from Des Moines, and Larry grew up in Maryville, Missouri. And they are part of a not-for-profit called the Family Cancer Network that helps families and patients with some of the financial obligations of cancer care. So in the cancer world, we call that financial toxicity, sort of that out-of-pocket expense. And sometimes it's out-of-pocket expense that isn't actually for the cancer treatment, but anybody go through cancer care, even someone with fabulous insurance often has a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. It can be co-pays and deductibles. It can be being off work for a while and losing income. It can be childcare and transportation and lodging. Tutors, yeah.
We've done it all, so we know exactly what you're talking about.
You know, and before we get into talking specifically about financial toxicity and the role that your not-for-profit plays in helping address that burden, everybody's got a cancer story, either their own cancer story or someone very near and dear to them. That's the reason, one of the reasons many of us get involved in cancer care and in not-for-profits. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe share a little bit your cancer connection.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity. My father-in-law passed away from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma back in 2008, and he was a great man, and I was lucky enough to have a really, really great father-in-law. And at the time, it took several years for that process to take him, and going through that, and a lot of my friends, Larry being one of them at the time, we started getting involved in the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, the local society, actually, the local chapter, and started raising money for the cause. And we got, his name was Bob, and we got Bob involved in all the fundraising, and really, I'd never had any experience with that. I up until this happened to Bob, this wasn't part of my life, so it was a jarring experience for me, and my friends were kind enough to come along in the journey and help us get through that time. So, that was kind of the genesis of really why we got here today. But that was my call.
And Tim, tell me a little bit more about Bob. How old was Bob when he was diagnosed with lymphoma, and how long was his cancer journey?
Yeah, his was a long one. So I met my wife when I was a senior in college. Bob had to have been probably about 50, maybe 48, somewhere in there when he was first diagnosed. So, went through the treatments. His treatment was effective, threw it in remission for a long period of time. Wife and I get married. We, have a great life with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and then it started coming back, in more frequent sessions. And, it was tough. It's still tough. Still tough talking about it, honestly.
Right. So it was one of those, it was what we might call an indolent lymphoma that over many years, and then the longer it went, the more it caused disability. And
that is correct. Yeah, he actually went so far as to the bone marrow transplant towards the end there. And that was, that's a hard thing. And but we got a lot of, I think he was 67 when he passed. So, not long enough.
Still young.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Right. So, and full of life too. So, it really, something like that really brings you to say to yourself, okay, what am I going to do? How are we going to go about doing this? What can we do? And that was our step into Leukemia Lymphoma Society at the time.
Yeah, we started raising money.
Definitely.
And Larry, do you have, besides Bob, other cancer connection?
My father also passed away from cancer. Happened to be Bob as well. But his journey was much shorter. He was diagnosed on September 9th and died November 11th. Oh, wow. So his cancer fight was very short by the time they diagnosed him. But that was 25, 30 years ago now. So he was 66 years old at the time. But so I was much younger. And
how old were you when your dad died?
He died in 95, so I would have been 29.
Okay.
So only had one child at the time, and so he didn't get to meet his other two grandchildren. And so then after meeting Tim and meeting his father-in-law Bob, and going through his battle with him again, just kind of stirred all of that back up. And so kind of Tim, like I said, brought us along, and we kind of just jumped in and found a cause.
And we're going to talk about your organization, Family Cancer Network, but I might say that this is your volunteers. I mean, you're a real estate developer, Tim, and you're a financial planner, financial advisor, Larry. But you got involved in not-for-profit cancer work out of really respect and honor for your parents, and started doing the fundraising thing. Right. So every cancer organization kind of has its thing, whether it is the Relay for Life for the American Cancer Society, or Team in Training for leukemia and lymphoma, or walks and runs and mountain climbing, and everybody kind of has their way of trying to raise money. Right. And what sometimes people don't have a good sense for what organizations do with the money that is raised. Sometimes people think, oh, well, this is all going for cancer research and it's going to find a cure. Sometimes there's other expectations. Maybe just tell us a little bit about your involvement with raising funds for a not-for-profit, your sense of learning kind of how the sausage gets made.
There's a little bit of that. Well, I'll take this, and then you go into our grant process a little bit. But with our involvement with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society at the time, their primary scope was research. Find a cure, right? And that's great, and they're a great organization. And I hope they put us out of business someday. That would be outstanding. At the time, though, they were transitioning a little bit away from patient services and more towards the research. That was their mission at the time, and that made sense. When we were involved with them at that time, we kind of saw a pull away from the patient side. So we sat down and said, well, what if we became that patient arm of this? What if we went out and raised the money? We were kind of proven money raisers. We were pretty good at that, and thought, well, let's get some volunteers. Let's find other people that got the passion like we do, and see if we can't raise some money, and then we'll distribute it to the Iowans that have to go through this financial collateral damage, toxicity situation that the cancer brings on. And that was the genesis of it, really. And in fact, I'll bring it up because you were instrumental, and it's funny how this all comes around. Here we are sitting in your studio. 2014, Larry and another volunteer of ours meet with you, and we didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea what we were doing. We just knew we could raise some money. How do we get it out there? And a lot of your advice really helped. So, brings us around to where we are now.
Larry, your perspective on kind of the early days and the transition from raising money for a big nationwide organization to helping create a local organization?
Yeah, you hit it earlier on too, where you kind of said, you raise money for these large organizations and you're not really sure where the money's going, right? And you kind of hope it goes to the right place, but you really don't know. And so early on, one of our goals was, let's make sure we tell people where the money's going. Be very transparent in where the dollars are. So we've always been 100% volunteer. So can't thank all the number of volunteers that we have that help us do what we do, because we couldn't do it on our own. There's a business side to this. There's banking fees and things like that, marketing and things that has to be paid for, and that's just part of raising money.
990 tax return.
Oh, exactly. You have to pay for all of that. But we try to put out there, here's the families you're helping. And here's where your dollars are actually going. And what we found it's been really eye-opening for us over the years when you start sharing that information and letting people know this is where your dollars went. These are the families that you're helping. And all of our money stays in Iowa. So that's another part of our mission statement. But it's really is eye-opening, and people really appreciate, I think, like I said, knowing how that sausage is made. They can see and the impact of their dollars.
Yeah. So let's dig a little bit deeper into sharing information about what we call financial toxicity, what you call collateral damage, because I think people don't always understand the significance of that. So cancer care is the most expensive medical care there is. And the most common cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical bills.
Correct.
And about 2% of all cancer patients go through bankruptcy because of cancer care. And so recent study shows that 65% of individuals of working age that are going through their cancer journey are experiencing significant stress. Excuse me. Significant stress as a result of the financial burden of cancer. And I mentioned at the onset that even people with really good insurance, and it's becoming more and more common that even if you work for a really big company that has great benefits, more and more every year your healthcare benefit has a greater copay and deductible that's expected. So if somebody has health insurance and doesn't have many health problems, they think, oh, my insurance is free. Once you start getting medical problems, they find out that they may have $10,000 of their own out of pocket that they need to be responsible for by the end of the year. And then, as we mentioned, that's for the medical expenses. And then when you start talking about taking time off work, and sometimes depending on how much vacation you have, it may be without pay, or it may be your loved one is now taking time off work and maybe without pay to help take care of you. And maybe you need to take time off to go to the doctor, and you need to maybe travel for a second opinion or a hotel bill or childcare. All of those just start really increasing. And then of course, there's the medical expenses and the very expensive medications, some of which are only partially covered by insurance. So what sort of stories can you share personal stories of families that you've helped and some of the difficulties that they've faced because of the cancer care that they've received?
And I'll try to share some of these stories with you. I'll apologize right up front. One of the unique things about our organization that we do is every grant's customized. So we call the families, find out what's going to be the biggest impact we can have with them. And so we get to know them. And so as I share stories with you, I'm already kind of tearing up here. They become personal stories, and it's sometimes hard for us to share those without tearing up. So I'm going to apologize up front for that. But a couple stories that still tug at my heart. We had a little 4-year-old Mikey that was leukemia patient, had been told by the doctors to his parents, you need to take Mikey home. The treatments aren't working, and need to prepare for, things to come, get things in order. So again, they'd been a grant recipient of ours, helping pay for some rent because they had to take off work to care for Mikey over a number of years. He'd gone through treatments and been in remission. This was the second time through. So I got invited to a fundraiser for Mikey. And so I went, and they were having to sell Mikey's toys to help raise money for his funeral costs. And so that really kind of brought home to us. First of all, we also, one of our grants is a standing grant. If we lose a family, we have a standing grant to help offset some of those costs. But you don't think about that part of it because you don't want to think about losing a family or loved one. But what are those costs going to be? We had another young man. He was going through his treatments, and he'd been a really good student. And mom and dad, like you mentioned, they had good insurance, but they'd run through their savings, right? So their savings had already been dwindled down. So now they're kind of living on paycheck to paycheck, had taken off all the vacation time they could. And he was struggling in school. And although he'd been a great student, he was struggling. And that was their biggest stress. And I think you kind of talked about this a minute ago, but part of our mission is to try to relieve that stress, because if you can relieve some of the stress, not only on the patient, but on the family, I think it does help the healing process as well. And so that's part of our goal, is to help relieve that stress from that financial, like I said, we call it collateral damage, but toxicity. So their biggest challenge was, how do we help him in school? So we ended up paying for 52 weeks of a tutor that they couldn't have afforded to have, but he had chemo brain, right? Those years as he's going through chemo, he's hard to concentrate, couldn't get through school, was struggling. And so we were able to step in, because that was their biggest challenge on what they could do. And so we funded the tutor for that family. So again, everybody's a little bit different. We had a young lady, she was in her 30s, two young daughters, young teenage daughters, had been living with a family friend when she had been diagnosed, and she was going to have to find a new place to live. So because the family friend was moving out of state, so she had to find a place to live. But she's in Iowa City getting treatment. Couldn't work. The girls couldn't work because they were too young to kind of support her. And so we got a call on a Monday morning from a social worker in Iowa City saying she has to be out of her place by noon today, and she has nowhere to go. And she has two teenage daughters, and so they were going to be homeless. They had no place. She had no job because she couldn't work because she's been going through treatment. And so we were able to, as an organization, rally, get a check cut, and find her a place to live by noon that day. And she moved in that afternoon. That was in July. In October, we have a fairly large, one of our more signature fundraising events. And we invited her to come to meet her, because we hadn't been able to meet her yet. And we were going to surprise her with a couple more months of rent. We had paid for 3 months of rent. We were going to give her, 3 more months of rent, so that she had a warm, safe place to live. Called her that week. She was planning on being there that Saturday, pouring down rain, cold, October, 10th. And of course she didn't come, right? And we had several other families weren't able to make it because of the weather, and we understood that. We called on Monday morning to let her know about the grant, and someone else answered her phone, and she had passed away. But she had a safe, warm place to live for the last 3 months of her life that she wouldn't normally have had because of that. So we see all kinds of things, and I can talk for 2 hours sharing stories, because we do know those families. And like you said, you never know exactly what the issue is going to be, but however you can relieve the stress is how you do it.
Tim, do you have any stories you want to share?
I mean, you nailed it. You both nailed it, really. You went through the litany of things other than health insurance. And of course, Larry's talking about all of those other things. And it was a learning thing for us. When that happened to Mikey, I don't know, that was an early on grant that and I remember Larry calls me and he's crying. He's telling me about it. I'm crying. I'm like, we're never going to be able to do this. This is a hard thing that we're doing, getting involved in these folks' lives. But we continue to do it. And it's actually, I think it's one of the more unique things about an organization of all volunteers. And it really pulls people in, people meaning our volunteers, because they want to get to know these people. They want to help these people. But I would say to that you don't quite realize that, this is the reality of it, right? Your mortgage doesn't care if you have cancer, right? Your cell phone bill, your heating, you name the bill, it doesn't care. You got to keep going. And it's interesting. One of our several of our grant committee members are people that have received grants from us. So they have been the recipient of this, and they are so overwhelmed and they felt so good about it. They are some of our strongest proponents of that.
I want to share one more thing, because I think it's really relevant to what we're talking about. When we do some fundraisers, we'll have one of our families come speak, and one lady that came really nailed it for people. She's like, you're going to find someone that has cancer, and you're going to go up and say, how are you doing, and what can we do? How can we help? And the typical response is going to be, we're okay. We're all right. We're getting through it. Everything's fine. And And she looked at the group and she goes, they're flat out lying to you. They're not okay, but they just don't know how to ask for help, and they don't know how to say that they're not okay. And she goes, fortunately, we don't take really no for an answer. We're going to give you the help. Here's how we're going to do it. But she goes, so now I carry $100 bill in my wallet. And if I run into somebody like that, I don't ask them how they're doing or what I can do. I just tell them, I know you're struggling. I know it's hard. Here, let me pay for your groceries, or here's $100. Let me help you out. Because they're going to lie to your face and tell you they're okay. And that's coming from a family member, right?
And yes, everybody has issues, and it's a difficult thing to ask for help.
It is.
Very difficult. So how do you, what's the process by which someone requests a grant? And what is your internal process? Do you do means testing? Do you have any professionals on your board, like social workers or other people involved in social services, to give you guidance? I think what you do is great, but I have a feeling that you cannot meet 100% of Iowans' needs.
That's correct.
And so it comes down to, you don't have enough for everything, so you have to make some decisions.
We do.
And so the part of that is maybe what's the
Yeah.
process by which you evaluate people.
So our process, so to qualify for a grant for us, we try to make it as simple as possible. You have to be an Iowa resident, and you have to be going through active treatment, either for a pediatric cancer or a blood cancer in our case. So if it's adult, it's a blood cancer, or any pediatric cancer. And we define pediatric cancer as 18 or below, age 18 or below, is what we use. So that's number one criteria. If you meet that. We don't have an income or a means testing. We ran in early on in our organizations. We're trying to figure out how to do all of this. We were asking for income, and someone's income would come in, and one of our members would go, well, why are we giving them a grant? They make X. And we're like, you make X, and you probably live to your means too. Your bills don't change. Mm-hmm. And you may be out of work for a while, so I'm not going to judge somebody on what they make. And again, back to that, if we can relieve some financial stress, it's going to help their healing process. So we don't do a means test at all. Our criteria: active treatment, an Iowa resident. That's kind of the criteria. So we really get involved with social workers from really 5 areas. Obviously, Des Moines, Iowa City. We really work closely with the social workers in Iowa City, Omaha, Sioux Falls, and Mayo. So we have social workers that are aware of us in each of those communities that will recommend to us. People also can come from our website and apply for a grant application. And when it comes through that, we also have on our application, we talk to some of the cancer doctors and what have you here in town locally, and got some of their advice on how to phrase this. But we have, so the patient can sign off that we can verify illness with the doctors. So the patient has to, so we'll make a call. If it's not coming from a social worker, we'll make a call to the doctor's office to verify the illness, because you're right. There's fraud out there too, and we have to be very diligent to make sure the money that people are entrusting us with.
But not even exclusive of fraud. There's just too many cancer cases for you to be able to take care of everyone and all their needs.
Right. And we have people that have applied that have had blood disorders, mm-hmm. but it's not cancer. Mm-hmm. And so then we do talk to some doctors and try to make a distinction on those, and we've had to deny people because of some of that too.
And so do you have any employees, or is it all volunteer?
We are all volunteer.
So you get who do they call? Who does the social worker at Iowa City
We have
a
call?
grant
What's
team.
the phone
So
number?
we have
Yeah.
we do have a phone number.
We do.
Most of the time, it's for a long time. It
But
was
who
my cell phone.
answers? It's
Well,
your cell phone.
It was my
Okay.
cell
hard.
phone
So
number.
they,
Yeah,
they
it was
call,
my cell
they
phone
call
number.
Family Cancer Network and they get Larry's
Yeah.
cell phone.
number. That's why we
That's
started.
how we started.
Uh-huh.
And still a lot of them have my cell phone number and call me direct, especially if they have something that's urgent.
Uh-huh.
And we've had sometimes when people are going to be evicted and we had to get something out right away. And so we can make that happen. Most of the time, the process is the social worker will email us the application. They'll help the patient fill it out.
Mhm.
They'll email us the application. We have a team of volunteers. Then that we have one volunteer that will take it and kind of assign that grant to a team member. And then, so we have a grant team, and then our exec board team are required to do grants too. So all of us do what, the rubber meets the road is giving out the grant.
Mm-hmm.
So we make the exec team and the grant team do that. They'll reach out to the family, and that's where the conversation starts. They'll put in the application kind of, here's what we think we need.
Yeah.
But most of the time, like you said, they don't know what they need. They don't know how to ask. So it's not until we can get into a conversation with them that we can figure out what that grant is going to be. Our grants then can be anywhere from a couple $100, because that's really all they needed and all they're looking for, to we've had them up to $8,000. And a lot of times we have some limits that if they get above a certain amount, the exec team or Tim and I have to approve them. But the grant team has some general guidelines on here's what you can approve and dollar amount. We also know, especially in pediatric cancer, and the number one pediatric is leukemia, it's a 3-year process. And so that may not be just a one-time request.
Yeah.
It may be a multiple request. And so we do kind of set one grant per calendar year. We can make exceptions to that, but that's the general guideline for us. And then we do kind of look at the broader, how much support have we given? Is it something that, are they being responsible too with the grant? We don't necessarily give people money, by the way. We pay third parties. We'll pay mortgages so they have other money to offset to pay other places. So we very, very seldom will use our donors' money to give someone cash.
Right.
That's a rare exception. Most of the time, we're going to pay a mortgage, a utility,
Another
car
expense
payment.
that
We
frees
actually
up
get their
that
bills.
frees up
Yeah.
their own
Yeah.
cash.
Yeah.
So we feel that's a more responsible way to ensure the dollars are being used for their benefit instead of just, hey, here's $5,000. We hope you're okay.
Would you say that most of the patients that you're able to serve, the patients and families, do have some sort of medical social worker or some social worker involved in helping? Because,
Probably 80% of them,
yeah,
but not all of them.
obviously what you do is very, very generous, but there's also a number of government organizations that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know how to apply for
Correct.
Medicaid,
That's so
how
true.
to apply for
Mhm.
other safety net
Right.
programs that are out there that if you don't know about them, you
Correct.
would have no idea.
Well,
how to-
sometimes in that process, the social worker will use us because there may be a government program they can qualify for, but takes forever to
way
get
too
through
long.
the red tape of the government process.
Mhm.
And they may need a case. We had a mom over in Harlan, Iowa. She had 4 kids. The youngest was diagnosed with leukemia in February of that year. Husband walked out on him in May. So she had 4 kids under 11. I think it was a 2-year-old that had leukemia. Husband left him, just walked out. Didn't pay bills, rent. They were behind on everything. They were going to be evicted. Social worker was trying to work with some government agencies to get them funding to, get them on the right track, but it wasn't going to be in time. And so that was one of those cases where we were able to step in,
Help with that gap.
help with the gap that needed to be helped. So we were brought in August. So we backfilled like 3 months of rent and utilities because the utilities were going to be shut off.
Yeah.
But we also then realized that kids were going to be going back. The older kids were going back to school. And although they weren't the patient, they're being affected just as much as the patient was. So we also then did gift cards for back to school supplies and shoes and clothes for the older kids, so they wouldn't be affected by that too. So you're right. There are a lot of great programs. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes
A lot of red tape.
longer
lot
to
of red
get
tape.
to them that where we can step in and
This
help.
is the red tape right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We're it.
so what are life lessons you've learned about the American medical system and our social support network?
Well, I guess I would say to that, I mean, the medical system does what the medical system needs to do and what it can do, but that there's so much more besides that piece, right? And that's the piece I think we try to, fill a gap with. And, I, again, not having any experience with it, didn't have anybody that have gone through it. Just seeing some of the issues that come along. I can't imagine. I mean, just the mind, wherever your mind is going while this is going on, if your loved one gets that diagnosis, you're going to forget about all your bills. Your bills become just like nothing, but they got to happen. They got to, they're there. And that piece of it, I didn't understand it. When we were starting this, the volunteers, sometimes they were saying, well, doesn't everybody have health insurance? Kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And we're like, well, yeah, it's not the piece we're talking about, really. I mean, it can be, but it's not the whole piece. So that's probably something I personally took away with.
I would tell you that the social workers, underpaid, underappreciated.
Yeah.
And
They're not enough.
they
and there's such huge shortage.
Not enough.
huge shortage for the social workers. We've seen turnover in some of the hospitals with the social workers. We get a relationship built, and then they have to leave because they're so burnt out and they're underpaid and understaffed.
Yeah, and it takes then a while to even learn in this location what
Mhm.
are all the
Who's doing what?
Who's
Rolodex,
available?
Who do you have the phone number to
100%.
call this person to help bring in the services?
Right.
Absolutely.
Can I ask, what would you what level of financial aid did you give in 2021? Is that like probably public knowledge with your
Oh, it is now.
not-for-profit?
Sure. Well, over the last 2 years, it's been over $250,000 in the last 2 years that have gone out the door. When we first got started, we raised the money, which is interesting because raising the money. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's something we know how to do. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Tell the story, let people come to you, and we have such a great committee. We can't even talk about them enough. Really,
Volunteers are so awesome.
they're amazing. But telling that story and getting people to come in, those first few years, getting the money out was a bit of a we got this money, come, and
I'm actively calling social
you're
workers.
like, yeah,
right.
So
I had social workers literally tell me, we know you're probably out of money, but if you could give us $100 to help
that was
do
in 2020,
a hotel room.
COVID year, yeah.
And I said, well, who told you we're out of money?
Yeah.
You let us worry about that part of it. We'll go figure out how to raise money if we need to. And I said, and by the way, I'm not going to pay $100 for a hotel bill for a gentleman that's coming out of a bone marrow transplant. He needs 100 days of clean, safe living, not a week of hotel stay. Right. So find him a single bedroom, apartment, and we'll pay for that for the next 3 months. Yeah. Never heard back.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Shocked, maybe. I don't know.
It was.
I don't know.
So part of your challenge was getting the word out.
Yeah.
Who are you? What is Family Cancer Network? How do you get access? How do people access you? What's your long-term strategy? What's your 5-year strategy? Where do you hope to be 5 years from now?
Sure.
Your organization started in 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
yeah.
you're 8 years. You haven't even had your decade anniversary yet.
It's coming up. Well, we've had an interesting journey because, we had the idea. We started out, and we were just going to have an event. It was going to be a 5K event. In fact, the long story behind it somewhat is we formed as our nonprofit because our event was called Blood, Sweat, and Beers. And yes, I said beers, blood, sweat, and beers. We're going to have a 5K event and raise money and just kind of see where it went. time starts passing, we start having more events. Corporate America wants to start donating, not real keen on the word beer in a nonprofit name. So if you've ever had to deal with the IRS and nonprofits, we had to go in and change our name, go through that process, which we did in 2020. But, our goal really is to continue to get the word out. We hold really fun events. That's kind of that's been our fundraising. We've got some great local corporate sponsors. They're so giving, not just with their money, but with their employees' time. And they're on our board or on our committees, and they're so involved. So that has been growing that network. I can see us in the next 5 years being a big piece of that.
We'll eventually have to have employees.
No doubt. No doubt.
Last 2 years, we've struggled with the fact that the workload.
Mm-hmm. You can only ask so much from a volunteer, right? I mean, it's hard.
It's hard to demand of a
We have a couple.
volunteer.
We've last 2 years we've done a couple hundred.
We're going to
grants.
cut your pay,
yeah,
Right.
which is zero.
Which is zero, by
Half.
the way.
In half. So we realize that we're going to have to go down the path of having some staff at some point, but we think it's well worth it to keep it going. And ultimate goal, we don't want to turn anybody down, and we want to make sure that we make an impact.
How have you been able to keep up like the infrastructure, like a website, for example?
We shoestringed this at the beginning like crazy. I mean, it was, so you know how to do a website? You're on the committee.
You're the webmaster.
Yeah.
What can you do? You're on the committee. I mean, that's how it started. And we have, we had the bumps just like any organization putting it together. But we have found the right people in those places, in those spheres, helping us with social media. I'm not too much of a social media guy because I don't quite understand that sorcery.
We don't even understand what's going on here.
Well, I don't even know what this is. I don't even know if you sure those are turned on. Yeah. So we do have some really, really talented people.
I
in our
hope you have
organization.
some folks under the age of 30
We do.
that can do Facebook for you. And
We
Facebook.
just
Like the whole Google machine.
the whole.
We're
I
just
don't
trying
know.
to figure
Do
that
you have
out
a
too.
TikTok account?
Oh, good Lord. We do. We don't have a TikTok account, but we have. That'd be impressive, wouldn't it?
No TikTok.
We have brought on.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
In fact, that's probably our biggest vehicle of getting the word out about our events.
Mhm.
Honestly, that are
Yeah.
coming up is the social media stuff.
Yes.
So, and we have a website person that takes care of our websites, and again, we're business people. Everybody's got their own job and their own family and their own kids, and then we ask them to come to a meeting, right? And it's and those spouses of the people that are on our committee are as every bit a part of our committee, even though they don't come, because they're taking care of whatever the heck needs to be taken care of at home while we have these folks this time. So
Tim and Larry, tell us, how can individuals here in the room, or those that are watching live streaming, or those who might, watch this on YouTube, how do they access your organization to request a grant?
Sure. So grant requests go right from our website, which is www.fcfamilycancerfcnet.org.
fcnet.org.
And from there, they click on apply for a grant, and it'll take them
Okay.
right to the process, and a grant application gets sent to them.
So,
If they want to participate in an event, all of our events get listed on the website, and they can say, hey, how do I do this? They want to donate. All can go through our website.
gotcha. So that
That's the
website,
starting
FC, like
Cancer.
family cancer, fcnet.org. And that's a way to not only apply for a grant, but it's a way to get involved with the organization and also to make a donation. All that can be done on that website.
Certainly.
One thing I also want, before I forget about this, because I think it's really, really important to make for awareness purposes. There are a lot of black hearts in this world. Okay, there are a lot of people that do things for the wrong reasons, and so I do want to make sure that the word gets out. If you have a loved one going through cancer and any sort of thing like that, they're going to be preyed upon. And what I mean by that is we've had families that have had their identity stolen, where they've been identified through whether it's a Facebook post, Caring Bridge post, whatever, but people track their progress. And we've literally had families that when the day that they're burying their loved one, have their bank account, money's taken from their bank accounts. So if you're in a situation where you have a loved one or know someone going through treatment, I know you want to share the information with people, but also be very, very aware of your own personal identity then too, because people are preying on them.
Mhm.
And those people have the blackest hearts in the world to prey on somebody during that time. But gosh, I hope people will take that from tonight at least.
Yeah.
And
We need more people praying for them
Correct.
rather than praying on them.
Got that
Correct.
right. Got
Yeah.
that right.
So,
Should we open up for some questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we got a live studio audience here. So, and we also have folks that are watching live streaming, and George will be looking for questions coming through that way. Yes, Kevin.
This might say client or somebody who's you're very sympathetic with, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to say no. How do you say no in those cases? Do you refer them to another organization, or
Yeah,
what do you do?
that's a tough one.
so if we're saying no to somebody, it's because they didn't meet the basic criteria. Otherwise, we're going to provide probably some sort of a grant for them in some fashion. It may not be exactly what they're looking for, but I can probably count on one hand, maybe two, of the people that we've had to turn away. And most of those were because it was either some sort of a fraud situation or they didn't meet the criteria that I mentioned before: active treatment of pediatric blood cancer, or a Iowa resident.
Yeah.
So
Those qualifications are not, it's not a laundry list of it. So we don't have to turn away too many. I remember the tough one though was that situation we had where it was a blood disorder, not a cancer. That was a tough one. And we do fraternize with other nonprofits that can possibly help with some of these things. So we're one big community. If we can't help, we're going to hopefully try to find somebody who can. Yeah, it's a great question.
It sounds like you're doing wonderful things for cancer patients and their families. I would guess that, going into a new year, you have some challenges. What are your main challenges?
Yeah. This past year coming out of COVID was quite challenging. Obviously couldn't have live events, and that, you think about the way we've raised a lot of our money, it was at events, the 5K event. We have a Beast Feast event, which is a banquet. And then we have these backyard parties for folks. So coming out of 20 and 2021 was challenging in and of itself. We ironically kind of pivoted like a lot of folks did and did virtual events and still raised quite a bit of money. I think our story, I don't want to use the word sells because that's not the right word, but I think resonates. Good. Thank you, Larry. Resonates. Thank you for being with people. So the event itself is not that pivotal. I'll give you the example. One year, the year we had the 5K event, and it was raining sideways. It was biblical rain. It was nuts. We still had 400 people show up. Nobody ran. They just came to support the cause. And so while we thought that was going to be more challenging, it wasn't quite as challenging. I think going forward, wow, I don't know. What would you say to that?
Because we're all volunteer, our biggest challenge always is making sure we're recognizing volunteers and not burning them out. So we're constantly asking people for more help because we're trying to spread the workload out. Many hands, right? Kind of deal. So that's the process we're always struggle with, is making sure we don't burn our volunteers, because Tim says we can't say enough about the great people and some of the corporate sponsors we have that have helped us over the years. It's been amazing.
Do you reward your volunteers with like fun events do you reward your volunteers by getting them together and having a fun event for them, or how do you do that?
So in January, we'll have an annual celebration event. We'll be out at Recplex here in town, where our volunteers will do some ice skating and pizza and things like that. So we try to get together. Again, over the last couple of years, it's been hard to do those things, schedules and everything else with kids. But yes, we tried to.
I would imagine most of your volunteers have been touched by cancer, and a lot of individuals, once they've come through their own journey, want to pay it forward. Those of us who are blessed with the capacity to be able to
Right.
help others.
100%.
Yeah.
You couldn't say it any better than that.
Yeah.
That's very true. Thank you.
Other questions?
Hello, you. And you're walking right into my question here. So it's a good question, a follow-up question. So I know that we can go on to fc.net to do your donations and become a volunteer, but
Let me just correct you, fcnet.org.
fcnet.org.
Net.org. Yeah, because you have to spell it right or you don't get
Yeah,
there.
we won't.
So I'm sorry, but go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you for the correction.
You're
Appreciate that. So let's say I become a volunteer, right? And I assume that there's a certain amount of volunteer turnover as well. Do you provide training for the volunteer? Because those people have to work with other people and say just the right things at the right time and be very cognizant of the people that they're working with.
Yeah. So if we bring a volunteer onto the grant team, we would provide some volunteer where one of our current grant team members would work with that volunteer for the first couple grants. So they would do it kind of side by side with a veteran grant team member and kind of learn the process and how to go. And then we have 2 or 3 people that have kind of taken over kind of leadership of the grant team that our volunteers can call, hey, this happened. How should I respond? What should I do? And they're really good at helping talk the volunteers through. Here's the reply you should have. Here's how you should do that. And then if it gets to the point where it becomes really tricky, then it does boil up to either Tim or I, depending on the situation. As far as a lot of times with the grants, we also may try to find a third party, not only just pay cash, but one of our great corporate sponsors, Summit Homes, they'll go build a ramp for somebody, right? They need to have handicap access to their house. They need a ramp. Well, we'll get Summit Homes to come build that ramp. Or we used to have a great friend that owned a car repair shop, and we've had to have engines replaced before. And so when it comes to those kind of things, we try to, because then we can get discounts too. So it doesn't cost us what a normal would be. So in those cases, we try to provide a list and resources for our volunteers to know we've got a hotel in Iowa City that we have a relationship with, that if they need a hotel there, call them, they'll direct bill us for this. So we try to provide some of those resources as well.
I'll add a little color to that too. I think to your question, we like our volunteers to come in through the grant committee first. We feel like that's why we're doing all this. And if you can feel that, which everybody does through that process, then you're going to probably stick around and want to do more, and then others might want to be on the social network committee, or maybe they want to help plan an event. And we have the veteran, that's a good way to put it, veterans that have been with us from the day one that can put people in the right place. So yeah, it's not a formal hierarchy really, but it's something that's worked for us. And there actually, ironically, is not a ton of turnover in our group. If you knew Larry and I, it's kind of surprising.
Really amazing.
It's shocker.
People stick around.
Wow.
It truly is.
But no, they have stuck around, and so I feel like we're doing something right in that perspective. So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, George.
Well, it seems like I always wax political. I look at things from the left side of the political spectrum, and I hear the wonderful things that you're doing, and it's great, and I kind of get caught up in it, and then I have to stop and think, this is what I want my government to do. How do you guys come down on that? The services that you're providing, are they primary services? Or are they, that they won't get done if you don't do these things? Or are you kind of secondary? Are you kind of a supplement to assistance that people are getting from other sources and, from our taxes, from our government?
For an intermediary. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point. We kind of touched on it a little earlier. There are a lot of government programs that can help some of our families with some of the housing and medical things. But sometimes the red tape takes a while to get through to get that done. And you have to have the social worker and the people know how to get through that system. Even the Medicaid system, trying to get through the donut hole. If you're familiar with the donut hole, your deductible and trying to get through all of that. Okay. A lot of the stuff that we're doing though isn't going to be a government assistance. Government's not going to be there to help offset the cost of a tutor. Government's not going to be there to, nor should they be there to help, offset the cost of your funeral expenses or to pay your travel expense to, go to MD Anderson or Mayo or Children's Hospital in Minnesota to get transplants. So I think it's a combination. We need the government to be there to provide services for the housing and medical and some of those things. But a lot of what we're doing, honestly, I think probably used to be done by the communities that people lived in, and we don't have that anymore, right? So the communities aren't surrounding those families like maybe they once did, and I feel like that's where we step in to do that. Is try to be that community for somebody.
Yeah, I would say that it still happens, but not. I mean, there's still bake sales and
Right.
things like that, but not everybody has that same social that close knit. I think that there probably are in Iowa lots of that neighborly love and financial assistance that does happen,
Sure.
but there's more need than there is.
Right.
And especially as you get to people that are don't have as many connections. Maybe they don't have a church that they've been a part of for 10 years. They don't have a close-knit group of friends that they've been with for years.
One of our very, very first grants was a 7-month-old little girl who had been diagnosed with leukemia when she was 4 months old. Single mom, was an assistant manager of a sub shop. Okay. She had moved into the hospital room at blank. Okay. And all of her possessions were in the hospital room for this little 7-month-old. And she had to have a stem cell transplant, which we don't do here in Des Moines. So she had to go to Minneapolis to get the stem cell transplant. Okay. So you think about that. That's okay. Fine. And she can get up there. There's Ronald McDonald's house up there that can provide housing for her when she gets there. How does she get there? Right? It's going to be at least 2 days before she can get into Ronald McDonald's house because they got to go through the initial doctor's appointment before she can be, into the house at that time. So we provided a grant for her that basically got her to Minneapolis so the 7-month-old could be, get the stem cell transplant, have a hotel for 2 nights so that before they could get into the Ronald McDonald's house. Okay. Now, fast forward that, we're 100 days later, got to move home. She's not been working. Mom's not been working. How does she pay rent?
What landlord wants to rent to,
And
some
what
of those
job is she
scenarios.
going to have? Because she can't get daycare because the little girl can't go to a daycare because she's still immune compromised, right? And will be for several months. So we ended up on the back end of that helping pay to move her back, 3 months of rent to get her on her feet so she could find a job. Those things don't happen just.
There's a lot of gaps.
Yeah, there are gaps out there.
Yeah. The government.
Thanks for filling the
can-
gaps.
Well,
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we're just a big organized bake sale. I like that.
That's exactly
I like
right.
that. That's kind of what it is.
But as you know, I mean, there's at least 2 distinct sides to a not-for-profit: money in and money
Money
out, and they both
Funny you say that.
deserve attention.
They do.
Yeah, and sometimes it's different talents of volunteers that
Very much so.
that are helping to raise the money, and then the talent of someone who can critically assess the how to get the grants out. But I just want to thank you for what you're doing, what your organization is doing. Again, it is the Family Cancer Network, and you can access the website at fcnet.org. And at that website, you can apply for a grant, you can donate money, you can volunteer your time.
You check out the events. We have the event schedule already up for 2023.
So what's your next event?
Next event is Beast Feast coming up.
Beast
here.
Feast.
Beast Feast. All things beast. It's just a
So
big
like
charity dinner.
Alligator,
Venison,
Oh,
be some venison, alligator,
Rattlesnake,
probably wild boar.
Doesn't that sound
wild
delicious?
turkey. And
Bear.
what's the date? of your
February
event?
18th.
February 18th, and
Stony
it's at
Creek Inn.
Stony
it's
Creek.
Stony
Inn.
Creek Inn.
And it's an auction and a good time, live music, and we get, I don't know how many we fill the room pretty darn good.
250, 300.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Well, Tim Mauro and Larry Laughlin, thank you for what
Thank
you
you
do.
for
Thanks
having
for
us.
being here. And thanks everyone for joining us. Please join us again next week for our cancer education series, brought to you with a grant from the Rosalie and Sherry Exline Ziegler Fund. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.